Number 1.
This is a tough one for anyone to believe, but it's also proving quite difficult for scientists and archaeologists to effectively explain away. Some years ago, an eagle-eyed visitor to the Top Rome Temple in Cambodia noticed what looks like a carving of a stegosaurus, or at least of a dinosaur, similar to the stegosaurus. Photographs were taken and posted onto the internet. Creationist groups quickly started to refer to the Cambodian Stegosaurus as proof that mankind once lived alongside the dinosaurs. How else would the ancient temple builders know what to carve? The Cambodian Stegosaurus has been featured in a myriad of TV and YouTube programs about subjects ranging from aliens to Atlantis. Top Rome is the name of a temple at Angkor, Cambodia. Originally called Rahavihara, it was built in the late 1100s and early 1400s as a Buddhist monastery. It certainly is fascinating and needs a closer look at the arguments of the believers and the skeptics. It might look a bit like a stegosaurus, but it's not a stegosaurus. According to the skeptics, the carving has serious anatomical errors when compared to an actual scientific reconstruction of a stegosaurus. The head is too broad and seems to have large ears or horns. The plates along the back of the carving are more like leaves. Careful analysis of local animals suggests that the sculpture is most likely a boar or waterbuck in front of a leafy background. What's quite worrying is that after a while the skeptics then say, well, even if it is a stegosaurus, then it was carved recently as a hoax. There are theories that the carving was made when the film Tomb Raider was being shot on location at Top Rome, probably out of boredom or as a film crew joke. They then go on to say that anyone could have carved it. And they may have a point. A key argument for its new proposal is the fact that the Stegosaurus carving seems somewhat lighter than those around it. Finally, the skeptics point out that even if it is a carving of a Stegosaurus, then it was probably based on a fossil skeleton found locally, which would explain why the head is too large and the hind legs aren't long enough. The Stegosaurus carving is located on a central stele that features a date. Translated into the modern calendar, it reads as 1186 AD. Other carvings on the column clearly show the ancient artist's expertise at reproducing known animals. A major criticism of the carving is that the alleged Stegosaurus is not anatomically correct. The three concerns are: the head is too large. There are no spikes on the tail, thagomizer. The hind legs are too short. It's important to point out that none of the carvings are precisely correct, and the ancient artists exaggerated elements to emphasize the importance of the creatures, including lions, elephants, and horses. With regard to the missing spikes, they would not be clearly visible based on the angle of the carving. The hind legs are more of a problem, but it could be that the artist simply shortened them so that the carving would fit into the space available. There is no evidence that the carving is recent. According to the researchers associated with the ruins, there is no evidence of overcarving or recent replacement stonework. Historians, in general, agree with this point. The carving appears as genuine as the other carvings on the same pillars that show lizards, monkeys, and swans, to name but a few. There's a good reason the stone is lighter colored. The guides and the researchers at Top Rome are happy to explain that visitors to the temple have been making plaster casts, molds, of the Stegosaurus carving, and that this process has lightened the stone. Early photos of the stele clearly show that it was once the same shade as those around it. Really based on a fossil? No Stegosaurus fossils have been found in the region. The closest discovered were in China, a fair old distance away. Of course, this doesn't mean that the ancients didn't find one, just that it's quite unlikely. Nobody has ever owned up to carving it, even anonymously. As the heading says, if the carving was a hoax, it is almost inconceivable that the hoaxers would have made at least some attempt to let people know how he or she fooled the world.
Number 2.
One of the strangest missing person case ever recorded in the USA is that of Stephen Kubacki. Stephen Kubacki went missing for 15 months without a trace. It is then claimed that he woke up in a field wearing strange clothes, with no memory of the previous 15 months. In February 1978, Stephen, a student at the time learning German, went missing in the Michigan area, USA, in an area known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. The Lake Michigan Triangle, sometimes referred to as the Michigan Triangle, spans from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to Ludington, Michigan, and south to Benton Harbor. The triangle has accounted for numerous mysterious events, beginning in 1891, when a schooner named the Thomas Hume set off across Lake Michigan for lumber. The Hume disappeared, along with its crew of 7 sailors. Not even a trace of the boat was ever found. Before he went missing, Stephen said he was going to go skiing. He was reported missing by his worried family a day after he was due to return from the trip. After he went missing, search teams scouted the area he was known to have headed to. They found his skis and his poles on the beach of the Lake Michigan and footprints on the ice leading up to the lake. Whilst searching for him, the rescue crew flew over the area, and it was reported that his footprints appeared to stop at the edge of the ice. The ice was unbroken, and a search of the area revealed no clue as to what had happened to Stephen. Later that day, they found his backpack in the same general area as his skis. No other evidence or sign of Stephen could be found. It appeared he had just vanished into thin air. May 5, 1979, 15 months later, Stephen walked up to his father's door, rang the bell, and was surprised to discover he had been missing for so long. Stephen said to his father that he didn't remember much. Stephen had woken up in Pittsfield, 40 miles from his father's house, lying in a meadow wearing clothes that weren't his. He had a small satchel beside him with maps that weren't his. Where he woke up was 700 miles from Lake Michigan. Reporters asked him repeatedly if he would talk to someone. He said he didn't need to because he didn't have any psychological problems and nothing to say about the time he was missing. After 1983, Stephen got a master's in linguistics and a PhD in clinical psychology. In 1921, 11 people inside the Rosa Bell ship disappeared and their ship was found overturned in Lake Michigan. The ship had been damaged in a collision, but no other ship had reported an accident and no other wreck was ever found. The bizarre case of Captain George R. Donner is one of the more mysterious triangle cases. On April 28, 1937, Captain Donner vanished from his cabin after guiding his ship through icy waters. The captain went to his cabin to rest, and about 3 hours later, a crew member went to alert him that they were nearing the port. The door was locked from the inside. The mate broke into the cabin, only to find it was empty. A search turned up no clues, and Donner's disappearance remains unsolved. One of the most mysterious cases over Lake Michigan happened in 1950 when Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, which was carrying 58 people, crashed into Lake Michigan. The plane was never found. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial airliner accident in American history. The pilot had just requested to descend to 2,500 because of a severe electrical storm, which was lashing the lake with high-velocity winds when the plane disappeared from radar. To this day, the plane wreckage has not been found, and the cause of the crash remains unknown. About 2 hours after the last communication with Flight 2501, 2 police officers reported seeing a strange red light hovering over Lake Michigan and disappearing after 10 minutes, leading some to believe a UFO was to blame.
Number 3.
On a very sunny afternoon on 10 March 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins mysteriously disappeared after his mother, Christine, a telephone operator, gave him a dime to spend on admission to the theater near their Mount Washington area home. The nation rallied behind the grieving mother and her missing boy, while the local police dragged nearby Lincoln Park Lake and launched a national campaign to find Walter. His apparent kidnapping struck a chord in a city still traumatized by a vicious crime only 3 months earlier. In that case, 12-year-old Marion Parker was kidnapped for ransom by a psychopath named William the Fox Hickman, who shoved her dismembered body from his car just before being captured. Countless tips on Walter's location led to dead ends. He was allegedly spotted as far north as San Francisco and Oakland. One reported sighting was at a Glendale gas station in the back seat of a car, wrapped in newspaper with only his head showing. The station owner described the driver as a foreign-looking man, probably an Italian accompanied by a woman. The boy's father, Walter J.S. Collins, who was serving time in prison for robbery, believed that former inmates out for revenge against him may have kidnapped his son, though there were no witnesses and no proof that had occurred. Police continued their search until August, when a boy claiming to be Walter turned himself in to Illinois authorities. Christine Collins paid $70 in travel expenses so the boy could return to Los Angeles. When he arrived, however, Collins said that although he resembled Walter, the boy was not her son. "You are a fool." However, the Los Angeles Police Department, under terrific pressure to declare the case happily closed, refused to believe that the boy wasn't Walter, whatever the mother said. Emotionally drained, Collins caved in to the cops' suggestion that she try the boy out and took him into her home. But after 3 weeks of attempting to reconcile herself to the convenient fiction, Collins returned him to the police. Armed with proof in the form of her son's dental records and a troop of friends who agreed that the boy wasn't Walter, Collins still failed to convince LAPD Captain J.J. Jones, who investigated the kidnapping, that the boy was an imposter. "What are you trying to do, make fools out of us all? Or are you trying to shirk your duty as a mother and have the state provide for your son?" You are the most cruel-hearted woman I've ever known. You are a fool. Jones allegedly told Collins. Resolved to bend her to his will in the department's convenience, Jones had the distraught mother committed to Los Angeles County General Hospital's psychiatric ward for evaluation. While she spent 5 days in the hospital, Jones extracted the truth from the faux Walter. The boy from Illinois confessed that he actually was 12-year-old Arthur Hutchins of Iowa. After his mother died, he had gone to live an isolated new life with his cold fish of a father and a malicious stepmother, he said. He ran away, hitchhiking around the country and working odd jobs. While stopped at an Illinois roadside cafe, Arthur said, he listened to a diner tell him how much he resembled the kidnapped boy from Los Angeles, whose picture had appeared in newspapers nationwide. Arthur quickly seized on an opportunity to see Hollywood, turned himself into authorities and carried out the charade by assuming the identity of the missing boy. For Collins, however, there was more heartache and trouble to come. Released from the hospital, she filed a false imprisonment complaint against the city, Police Chief James Davis and Jones. With the heat on the department, Jones, who also was being pressured to help solve a grisly murder mystery, insisted that Walter had been one of the victims of Gordon Stewart Northcott and his mother, who had recently been charged with beheading a youth, one of 11 children they sexually assaulted and murdered in Riverside County. But Collins refused to believe it, especially because her son's body was never found on the Northcott's chicken ranch in Wineville, now Mira Loma.
Number 4.
On Monday, November 10, 2014, Kenneth Lee Veach, known by friends and family as Kenny, told his family that he was going on a short, overnight trip into the Sheep Mountains in Nevada. The 47-year-old hiker then headed out and never returned home. Kenny's disappearance was as unceremonious as his exit, and few concrete clues were ever found. However, the truly bizarre aspects of the story begin not with Kenny's November 10 hike, but a little over a month earlier. Oddly, it all seems to have began with an offhanded comment on a YouTube video. Kenny Veach was an experienced solo hiker in the unforgiving Nevada desert who became famous when he disappeared. The video of his last post went viral on YouTube in 2014. He called the trek Soul Hikes, in which he meandered all over the area by Nellis Air Force Base and the place we call Area 51. In this instance, he was hiking just north of Las Vegas, in the Sheep Mountains, and discovered this cave whose entrance was shaped like a capital M. As Kenny got closer to the entrance of the cave, his body began to vibrate. The closer he walked, the more it vibrated. It was at that time he pulled out his only line of defense, a knife. As he walked forward, he vibrated, finally becoming so frightened that he ran away from the cave. Taking his footage, he went home and put the whole thing up on YouTube. Kenny was 47 years old and by all accounts was a likable, decent man with a passion for hiking. In his video, he is affable and enthusiastic. He was described by a relative as a bit of an adrenaline junkie. From what I read about him, it was true. He once picked up a rattlesnake and had to be hospitalized for a week. He did not take much in the way of supplies. He would be gone for days with a chocolate bar and water. He even admitted he put his body through a lot. Once he hiked so long his toenails turned black and fell off. The area Kenny was hiking around was full of old mine shafts that the military had dumped barrels of chemicals into. It was about 7 miles from the testing range, so it was very isolated. It was a place well known for having drug addicts take up residence in and a popular dumping ground for murder victims' bodies. So, one of his biggest mistakes is that he went alone. The first YouTube video was received with mixed reviews. Immediately people commented that he was lying about the experience. Others dared him to go back and get more footage. So, he did with a little water and a Rutger 9mm gun. He overlooked the cave in the second video, which got bad comments on his YouTube page, one that suggested that he kill himself. So, Kenny went back again, inviting all who wanted to come with him. No one did. Kenny was last seen November 10, 2014. He has not been seen since. His phone was found in Sheep Mountains on a rock near a mine shaft. The shaft was searched, but no Kenny. He has not been seen since. So, was Kenny murdered because he stumbled on some secret government project? Did he commit suicide? Or was he just a high-risk hiker that ran out of luck? A few days after Kenny disappeared, his girlfriend posted a note on YouTube in the comments section in which she states she reported him missing and he had not been found. She finished by encouraging all hikers to take GPS with them. She went on to tell people later that though Kenny seemed in good spirits and upbeat, that he suffered from depression and refused medication. An interesting side note is that Kenny's father committed suicide when he was 20 years old. He said if he ever decided to do that, no one would find his body.
Number 5.
Mount Shasta is a volcano located at the southern end of the Cascade Range in Siskiyou County, California. At 14,179 feet, it is the second highest peak in the Cascades and the fifth highest in California. It is also the location of a number of strange and unexplained disappearances. The strange true story of a 3-year-old child that was lost in the Shasta forest for 5 hours is just one of the many strange things that have happened. He was gone within a second, according to witnesses. Other campers were thought responsible and questioned, but later that day the boy reappeared and told a story not of this earth. He claimed he was abducted by a robot double of his grandmother and taken to cave filled with spiders. A strange story. Well, it gets odder. The very same grandmother claims she woke up one morning face down in the dirt, having been removed from her tent and sleeping bag whilst camping at Mount Shasta. When she woke, she had a puncture wound on the back of her head. She said she felt violently ill that morning and felt strangely emotionless, so she thought she'd been bitten by a poisonous spider. She said she was with a friend who'd been sleeping in his separate camper, and he also woke up with a bite on the back of his neck, and he felt ill as well. The only thing strange she could recall was seeing red eyes shining through the trees in their flashlights night before, which they thought were deer. Coincidentally, 2 more bizarre incidents happened around Mount Shasta during the time period of the boy's disappearance in 2011. That same month, in September, a Los Angeles area man hiking the Pacific Crest Trail heard the beautiful singing of a female voice coming from the direction of Mount Shasta and wandered off the trail to follow it, becoming lost in the woods. He claims he was abducted and taken to a dark chamber in a cave and stripped of all his clothing. A tall female with unnatural blue eyes and strange clothing appeared and gave him a gift and secret information, which he declined to provide details of. He was reportedly lost for several weeks, and after surviving this ordeal, this person now believes he is the incarnation of a messianic Hindu god and changed his name to Lord Kalki. Another Los Angeles area man was with a spiritual group of friends meditating up on the mountain on 11/11/2011 and decided to take off his shoes and hike up to the top of the mountain to place a rock on its summit. A storm blew in, delaying search efforts, and his body was found the next day at 9,600 feet. Mount Shasta is legendary for containing all kinds of local folklore about underground tunnels and hollow earth type theories. These kinds of stories revolve around underground military installations and UFO bases, ancient tombs and caverns, and cities buried beneath the mountain. A multi-dimensional city called Telos is believed by many to reside beneath the mountain, inhabited by Lemurians who built a sanctuary beneath Mount Shasta after the downfall of their own civilization. An exhaustive list of all the stories of people who have claimed to be taken into the underground chambers and caverns beneath Mount Shasta would fill a lot of books and extends well back into the late 1800s. Sometimes people claim to venture into these subterranean regions voluntarily, at other times, not so voluntarily. In fact, stories like this extend even further back into history, to the Native American tribes who have inhabited this region for thousands of years. They talk about being able to travel in underground tunnels between southern Oregon, Mount Shasta, and the upper coasts of California and southern Oregon. Some tribes have admitted that the locations and entrances of these tunnels are a closely guarded secret which has never been shared with the outside world. The region surrounding Mount Shasta contains thousands of caves, the vast majority of which have never been explored.
Number 6.
The Birkdale Palace Hotel in Southport, Merseyside, was a luxury hotel on the northwest coast of Lancashire. The huge building opened its grand doors in 1866 and lived a very colorful life before being torn down in 1969. It was long rumored in the area that the hotel was built the wrong way around by the architect William Mangle, with the front of the building originally meant to face the seafront. The original architect plans, now on display at Southport Museum, indeed show the hotel facing west and not east as built. It is also claimed that this mistake made Mangle throw himself off the hotel roof to his death just before the grand opening, but the more likely story is it was Mangle's younger brother who jumped from the roof for reasons unknown. His ghost was said to be seen riding the elevators, one would assume after they were installed, 15 years after his death, and wandering the second floor. On 9 December 1886 there was a tragic lifeboat disaster, and the hotel outbuilding was used as a temporary mortuary for the bodies of the 14 lifeboatmen who drowned after being launched to rescue a boat named the Mexico that had run aground in a storm. All members of their crew were rescued. In 1919 the hotel introduced flights from Blackpool to the nearby aviation ground. In an official guide to Southport in 1939, The hotel boasted of billiards, croquet on the lawns, dancing, evening concerts, Sunday afternoon orchestral teas and tennis, to name but a few activities available. It had 1,000 rooms and around 200 bedrooms and suites. By this time, the hotel had become a successful holiday resort hotel and conference center, with stars like Frank Sinatra and Clark Gable staying there. In 1962, the Beatles even performed there. During the Second World War it was taken over by the Red Cross and became a rehabilitation center for U.S. airmen. It was one of the biggest centers in the UK for U.S. Air Force personnel, with more than 15,000 of them recuperating from active flying service at the hotel during his period. After the war, hotel staff quickly noticed an abundance of strange activity. One receptionist who worked at the hotel in the 50s, called Pauline, recalled never using the lift and never venturing around the hotel unaccompanied, as she felt a sense of dread for reasons she couldn't explain. In 1958, records showed no fewer than 17 guests died during that year at the hotel, 4 of these in the same room, room 287. This fact was reported as 17 dead, beating the hotel's previous 1886 record of 14 dead. In 1961, there was a horribly gruesome real event that took place. 6-year-old girl Amanda Jane Graham was abducted by a porter who worked at the hotel. Her dead body was found under his bed. She had been raped and strangled. Alan Victor Wills, who worked at the hotel as a porter, was convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison. Wills was 33, but said to have had a mental age closer to 11. There is also a persisting story about 2 sisters who carried out a suicide pact in the hotel. The hotel soon closed its doors, the haunting reputation driving the final few guests away in the late 60s. The hotel was still in use until the 1960s, when its final owners, Head & Hotels, went into liquidation and were wound up in 1967. In February of that year there were only 2 guests, an elderly permanent resident and the company controller's wife. Strangely, nobody can account for the departure of the elderly permanent guest. Near the end of the hotel's life in 1968-9, it was used as a film production base for Tigan Films, the horror movie company run by legendary British producer Tony Tenser, who lived in the area. They filmed The Haunted House of Horror, an early teen slasher movie. Tony then tried to save the hotel, suggesting to jointly buy the empty building with Southport Council so it could be turned into a film studio, but the council turned down the idea as they didn't enter into commercial partnerships. The rest then was history as the demolition began on the faded grandeur of the old hotel, which is when things got really spooky. The demolition team experienced the strangest activity when tearing the building down in 1969. It centered around the large Victorian lift. When the team cut the lift's power and put on the brakes, the lift continued to move between floors. Oddly, the emergency hand crank on the lift had been removed. The crew were puzzled. Speaking to the local newspaper The Southport Visitor in 1969, Joe Smith, who was heading the demolition team, said, "Things began to happen soon after we started the job. First we were woken up by eerie voices and other strange noises in the middle of the night, then the lift suddenly began to work by itself." Furthermore, according to that particular report, the team of workmen became so unsettled by the inexplicable goings-on they cut the giant lift from its holdings, but still the lift didn't drop. The workmen hammered the top of the lift until this caused it to come crashing down from the 3rd floor into the basement. It seems the lift and indeed the hotel didn't want to go anywhere. This same construction crew reportedly found themselves locked into their hotel rooms on occasions. In fact, these poor men must have thought they were losing their minds. They claimed to hear a man and a woman arguing on the top floor, and when they investigated, the same disruption then appeared to be coming from the reception of the hotel, even though access was restricted due to the rubble on the staircase and the fact that the handrail had been removed. They also reported hearing stiletto heels in the lobby, and as the men were staying at the hotel to save on money, and with so many empty luxury spaces available, a number of them reported that they found themselves locked in their rooms by an unknown force. The madness doesn't end there, however. The local police force received a call traced to the palace from a distressed woman claiming to be locked in one of the rooms. However, upon arrival, the local bobbies discovered the phone lines had been disabled months before and were no longer working. Even to this day, stories abound in the local area of strange goings-on in the newly built properties that reside on the original land. In the 90s, poltergeist activity was reported at a house on the corner of Oxford Road, part of the site that was the palace. A family fled their home, leaving all possessions behind. Something certainly spooked them. Eyewitness reports from those who visited the scene said it was literally like they'd all suddenly left in the middle of what they were doing at the time, with cans and a tin opener set out in the kitchen, ready for cooking, and other signs they'd left in a hurry. In 2011, another haunting at the same location resulted in an almost identical occurrence when another young family fled in a hurry after an invisible force seemed to rush through the house every evening, strong enough to knock down their 4-year-old child. It seems then that you can tear down and demolish old buildings, just as they did with the Birkdale Palace Hotel, but some guests only check out when they themselves are ready to leave.
Number 7.
Writer Danny Casolaro was found dead on 10 August 1991. He was found submerged in a bathtub in room 517 of the Sheraton Hotel in Martinsburg, West Virginia, his wrists slashed 10-12 times. The official verdict was suicide. At about noon on August 10, 1991, housekeeping staff discovered Casolaro naked in the bathtub of room 517. His wrists had been slashed deeply. There were 3 or 4 wounds on his right wrist and 7 or 8 on his left. Blood was splattered on the bathroom wall and floor, and according to detectives Ridgway and Vaughn, the scene was so gruesome that one of the housekeepers fainted when she saw it. At the time of his death, he was investigating a sprawling criminal conspiracy he labeled the Octopuses. The exact nature and extent of Casolaro's octopus, or whether it existed at all, has been subject to much debate and speculation since. The cause of Casolaro's death itself was disputed, with many authors and investigators regarding the suicide verdict with skepticism, leading to suspicions that Casolaro was silenced because of what he had discovered about the octopus. Had Casolaro stumbled upon a vast criminal conspiracy? Danny's brother said he had warned him before his death. "If anything happens to me, don't believe it's an accident." Other friends and family members confirmed that Danny had spoken of threats on his life in the months before his demise. Casolaro's starting point for his investigation was a real criminal case, that of a wide-ranging Washington scandal involving allegations that the U.S. government had stolen software company Inslaw's Promise program and added illegal backdoors in order to spy on foreign governments. Casolaro called his conspiracy octopus for a reason, as he followed the trail from Promise to reveal a much larger story, one that encompassed such seemingly disparate events as the October surprise, the collapse of Bank BBCI, and the illegal drugs and arms trade, all orchestrated by a secret cabal of global elites. Whilst the full extent of Casolaro's octopus is in dispute, it is based on several real events. Casolaro was found dead in a hotel bathtub, seemingly having slit his wrists and bled to death. However, friends, family and some investigators immediately doubted the verdict. Suspiciously, the large accordion file with Casolaro's notes and evidence was missing. Casolaro had also been complaining to friends about anonymous death threats he had been receiving. On one occasion, his housekeeper fielded multiple calls in the space of a few hours, one in which a voice said he was going to cut Casolaro's body up and throw it to the sharks. Paramedics and medical professionals found problematic details in the suicide. One pathologist who studied the autopsy noted the lack of hesitance marks and the savage, deep nature of the cuts to Casolaro's wrists has been highly unusual. This was echoed by an attending paramedic who told investigators, "I've never seen such deep incisions on a suicide. I don't know how he didn't pass out from the pain after the first 2 slashes." The toxicology report also came under scrutiny. Antidepressants were found in Casolaro's blood, yet he had no history of depression and had never been prescribed the drugs.
Number 8.
Emilie Sagee never saw her doppelganger. Everyone else did, though. American writer Robert DeLoan, who was told the story by Julie von Guldenstub, the second daughter of the Baron von Guldenstub. In 1845, when von Guldenstub was 13, she attended Pensionat von Neuwalk, an exclusive girls' school near Woolmer, in what is now Latvia. Sagee worked in an exclusive girls' school. She was a very good teacher, but for some reason she kept moving from one job to another. In 16 years, she had changed positions an impressive 19 times. In 1845, the school found out why. Sagee was allegedly the center of some very strange doppelganger activity. Her spectral twin was first seen during a class, as 13 students witnessed a doppelganger standing by Sagee's side and mirroring her movements. Next, it stood behind her as she ate, pantomiming her movements. Sagee herself was completely oblivious to the apparition, despite the fact that everyone else could see it clearly. However, she did become strangely groggy and powerless during the times the doppelganger manifested, and the wraith was often seen doing things Sagee later said she had been thinking about at the moment, suggesting that she may have had some subliminal control over it. Soon, the doppelganger ventured beyond Sagee's immediate vicinity. At first, it appeared to a classroom full of students, sitting calmly in the teacher's chair while Sagee herself was outside, working in the garden. The account goes like this. Witnessed by nearly 50 persons, the students were intently working in their sewing class while another teacher sat at the front of the room reading a book. Outside the window, the students could see Emilie working in the garden. The supervising teacher stood up and left the room. Seconds later, Emilie walked in and sat down in the empty chair. Students thought nothing of it until one gasped and pointed out the window where Emilie was still working diligently in the garden. Two of the students stood and approached the doppelganger and, being quite brave, reached out and touched it. They said it looked just like Emilie Sagee in all aspects, except when they ran their hands through the entity, they said it felt empty, like the stuff cobwebs are made of. Later, Emilie Sagee had told school officials that she indeed had been outside picking flowers in the garden. She had not seen the doppelganger. In fact, Emilie never once saw her twin, but had in fact wished to herself that she was in the classroom supervising the sewing class. School officials noted in their documentation that each time the doppelganger appeared to them, the real Emilie appeared lethargic and listless. The few people who dared to approach the doppelganger found they could pass through it, yet it had a texture that reminded them of thick fabric. Time went by, and the apparition became a permanent fixture of the school's life, freaking people out on a regular basis. The girls' concerned parents started removing their children from the school. Although Sagee was a model employee on all non-paranormal accounts, the headmistress had no option but to fire her and her ghostly double. Parents complained about the ghost, and Emilie was summarily dismissed from her job. The French novelist Guy de Maupassant was inspired to write a short story, Louis? He? After a disturbing doppelganger experience in 1889. While writing, de Maupassant claimed that his body double entered his study, sat beside him, and began dictating the story he was in the process of writing. And Louis? The narrative is told by a young man who is convinced that he is going crazy after having glimpsed what appears to be his body double. For de Maupassant, who claimed to have had numerous encounters with his doppelganger, the story proved somewhat prophetic. At the end of his life, de Maupassant was committed to a mental institution following a suicide attempt in 1892. The following year, he died. It has been suggested that de Maupassant's visions of a body double may have been linked to mental illness caused by syphilis, which he contracted as a young man.